Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us and joining us to the do's and don'ts of AR. We are Evelina and Osama. She's a researcher. I'm a designer. We both work at the same company, and that company deals with a lot of emerging technologies, and some of the viable solutions that we've entertained in is augmented reality. So we've explored some of the do's and don'ts or strategies to apply interface design to augmented reality.
Actually, so to add to that point, we have to run to the airport right after our talk. So if you have any questions that we don't get to in Q&A or something comes up later, as you're thinking about these principles, feel free to find us online, message us. LinkedIn is a good way to reach us. But we have quite a lot of information that we don't get to share with you today. In fact, one of our engineers has built an app for us where we can try design principles in AR. So we are using it internally to test out some ideas. And it will be available for sharing with anybody as an open source code, but we don't have that information today. So if that's something of interest to you, again, find us online, reach out to us, and then we'll be glad to share that with you.
All right, so our talk is focused on augmented reality, but it's related to what we call the three realities, and that's augmented reality, mixed reality. Augmented reality is essentially takes a live view of your environment and projects or adds information or data on top of it. And mixed reality basically lets the user see this real world environment with the data that's projected on it, but lets the digital elements that are projected interact with each other and the environment. And then you have virtual reality, which is a complete virtual immersion into a fake world. Like, this guy is a bird and he's simulating every aspect of being a bird.
And it exists. It's a real thing.
Yeah.
Somebody actually.
Yeah, that's a fan blowing air into his face, which coming to a theme park near you. So here's the spectrum. So you can see AR on one side, VR on the other, and mixed reality is this kind of blend between the two. While we're going to be focusing on augmented reality, a lot of the design principles and trouble areas kind of relate to all the other reality spaces.
So if you are designing for augmented reality at some point, or if you're designing for virtual reality, it's a good idea to kind of touch all of these technologies and experience them for yourselves, because you can borrow a lot of interaction and design elements from these modalities to be used successfully for one specific one that you're focusing on.
So we're going to focus on augmented reality. And, go back. And augmented reality is really kind of plays on three distinct platforms, and that's mobile devices, so your phone, smartphones or tablets, viewer boxes, which use the phone and kind of blend this VR or AR world, and so like Google Cardboard is a viewer box, and then we have smart glasses, which Google Glass is probably the most notable one. So an example of all three is an example of an augmented reality app. As you can see, there's digital objects placed in a real physical space. And then we have a viewer box. So this is the phone inside one of these Google Cardboard type viewer boxes, and there's digital objects presented in the physical space as well.
So just to add to that, Google Cardboard is typically used for virtual reality games using your smartphone, but there are certain apps that try to bring augmented reality feel to it, right? So this is one of those examples. So this particular app is called Zapar. It's one of the main ones that is trying to do this. So we will tell you at the end of the presentation some of the apps that you can actually go and download and play with for yourself to kind of see more of these examples that we talk about.
And then finally, there's smart glasses. So this is really a conceptual view of Google Smart Glass, Google Glasses. And what we've noticed is that a lot of the useful application is found in the industrial space, where workers need to have their hands free because they're doing work. But they can go ahead.
Right. So Google Glass or any of the other smart glasses have not really taken off in the consumer space because as we heard yesterday, there's a lot of privacy concerns and just utility and having to jump many layers to kind of make use of what the capabilities of the glass are. But in the industrial space, Boeing and GE are definitely using these, and there are a lot of other smart glasses like Epsom and Vuzix that are very successful, and they support the workforce very effectively.
Okay, so but for today, we're going to be focusing on mobile devices and AR in that space, mainly because it's the most widely used and more commonly acceptable to all of us.
And it's going to be the easiest transition for consumer AR products because most of us have a smartphone and have a tablet, and it's easy. It's an easier way to adoption to do mobile AR.
And so in this space, we're going to cover three main areas for designing for mobile AR. So designing for digital objects, designing interfaces, and then the interaction design side of it. So first, digital objects. So this is really the foundation of what augmented reality relies on, and that's digital objects presented in the physical space, which comes in many forms and through many technological means, such as smart glasses or heads-up displays, mobile devices with a live view environment. So that's the main characteristic. So in this, related to digital objects, we'll talk about appearance of the digital object, how animations can be used to create an expressive or creative digital object, and the touch don't look kind of approach to it, which we'll go into. So first, on appearance, why does this matter? Well, the primary goal of digital objects in AR is to simulate a virtual object in the physical world, or a physical object in the real world. And 3D objects will do a better job of this rather than a flat two-dimensional object. And 3D objects are just inherently more engaging and imply interaction, which is what you're trying to stimulate in the user. Next, animation. So a well-designed 3D object is a good start, but there's more to do. So animations can play a key role in keeping the user's attention. One of the biggest issues with augmented reality and mass appeal or adoption of augmented reality is that people don't spend much time with AR apps. They're very frivolous or somewhat useless or lack purpose, and the experiences just aren't rich enough, and people just kind of drop in and out of apps. So animation is a good way to prolong the user's interest. Prolong the user's interest in the 3D object or your application, and it could also be very useful to indicate the interactive elements in your 3D object, which we'll cover in the interaction side of things. And then finally on digital objects, the touch don't look mentality. So a good looking 3D object, we got that down. Animations are still not enough. Users will naturally want to engage in your 3D object, especially if it's well designed and it's engaging and has some visual interest. So you want to present the user with clear affordances to show how they can interact with the 3D object. In this case, is that playing?
It's not playing.
Okay. Yeah, so you can see there's the 3D object appears, and then you can manipulate what layers are shown on that object to reveal more information or hide more information. And then there's the slider there that we can use to dive even deeper and have more nuanced control.
And if you play with AR apps yourself, like go through multiple of those, you will get the sense that like it's very compelling to reach and touch the 3D object that's on the screen. And it is a rewarding feeling when you actually can interact with that object versus when that 3D object is there moving for you, but you can't do anything with it. So you want to make sure that your products and anything that you design kind of address this kind of user need to touch and get something out of touching the 3D objects in AR space.
Okay, and so now we go on to interface design, and no surprise here that the common design principles that we use day in and day out to design interfaces still apply in the AR space and the VR space and the MR space. So these principles are things like visual hierarchy, this quality of states, so inactive or active states, and then spatial composition and typography. These are all key things that apply in AR, but they should be evaluated and considered within the nuances of the augmented space. So we'll touch on each of these. So our established perception, the first thing is the 2D or 3D layers. Our established perception of mobile interactions are based on the fact that they're overwhelmingly presented in 2D fashion. So think menus or buttons or sliders and so forth. So consider that when users see 2D elements in your AR experience, they may perceive them inherently as interface elements. Because the view that they're seeing, the augmented information on is 3D, so they get the live view of the environment that they're in and then the 3D object that lives in that environment. So anchoring these 2D elements also reinforces the perception that they're interface elements and they're the space that the user will interact with the 3D environment or the augmented world. So use that to your advantage and create 2D interfaces with the purpose of user interaction. Next, mobile patterns are well established and a lot of them will apply in the mobile space. So what you can see here is Pokemon Go, and we have these very clear, distinct buttons that you find in a lot of other, and elements that you find in a lot of other applications. So that means that the interface patterns found in mobile apps, while they're good to use, you'll want to strip them down because you have a live view that's being played in the AR side of things. So you have a live camera view and then you have digital objects in there, and you want to strip the interface elements to give deference to the live view that's coming through the camera. And that relates to this idea of pixel economy. So because augmented reality experiences rely heavily on the live camera view, they have a potential to experience, and users have a potential to experience visually rich and dense views of information. You want to reduce or maintain low cognitive load. And that means you'll have to scrutinize your UI decisions so that they don't overwhelm the user or compete with any live view elements that are being displayed.
So we have no control over the environment in which the users will pull up the app, right? So we have no control about lighting, the visual noise that they have. And so we have to be very sensitive about providing the information the user needs only at that time, and it has to be really minimal so that it's not competing with everything else that is going on already in the camera view and the 3D, the AR objects that we're already presenting to them as the main focus. Because if they are overwhelmed, if they cannot find what they need to do amidst all this visual noise that they're experiencing through all these different inputs, then they're going to drop out of the app, right? So it's going to be low adoption of your product.
Yeah, and another strategy that you can employ is the use of context, and specific one example would be proximity. So as you near an object that you want to promote interactivity with in the physical space, that interaction element, that UI element, maybe doesn't appear until you get close enough to it. Or maybe you just indicate that there's something there, and as you get close to it, you can make it interactive. And that's a good way to conserve some space in the screen. So that leads us to the next thing, is letting the user know what's interactive. And so how do they know something's interactive? Well, we've touched on some of the properties of digital objects with like animation that can be useful. Other things are digital styling that can be applied to interface in AR. So an example, which I'm using, one of my favorite games of late, The Witcher 3, shows these highlighted boxes that are things you can interact with. And you can use this kind of same visual styling or strategy to indicate what's interactive in a AR world.
So, and as we said at the beginning, right, so you can borrow some of the design principles from other kind of technologies and solutions. And so gaming, they have a lot of design patterns that promote this idea that, oh, I can touch this, I can interact with this is something that I cannot interact with. So by exposing yourself to these different modalities, you can learn a lot of kind of these insights to be used in AR as well.
And then we have careful typography for low resolution. So this is more critical to like smart glasses, but in general, when you have an example of the background world, the real world that's coming through the live view, and then your digital objects moving around in that view, throwing text in front of that creates some potential areas for concern. So you can see there's a lot of small text here and there's a lot of text. So some of the things you want to be careful about is that the text in your AR experience should be short and exact. You want it to communicate exactly what the user needs to know. Try to remove any fluff. And make sure the typography is legible. And that should just be a goal in any design, especially if you're a designer. Also keep in mind that in most cases, the physical environment can add a lot of visual noise to the scene, and that's going to make it even more difficult to read text. So you want to style the text appropriately.
And this is also a consideration for you to make. Do you even need to present text? And if you do, maybe you need to provide a flat background on which your text will be presented so that the visual components from the actual environment don't interfere with the text that you're showing. Like here, we have some white text and we have the crosswalk lines, right? And the contrast between those is very low. So your user may not be able to read that text and they might miss it. So sometimes text is not necessarily the best way to communicate information. You could use audio information to kind of give your message. So do consider such constraints when designing.
All right, and the next area we want to cover is interaction design. And the three main areas are the touch interaction, touchless interaction, and then feedback of those interactions. So touch is the most typical type of interaction found in mobile AR. It's kind of the de facto interaction method. The thing is, though, touch fails in specific situations. So when we get into the viewer box platform, you don't have really access to the screen. Some viewer boxes will give you a little finger hole so you can go in there and just tap anywhere to indicate acknowledgement of some sort. But you'll want to rely on touchless interactions, which we'll cover next, to handle the viewer box elements. So in that, in those experiences where it's primarily with a viewer box and you can't access the screen, interaction is heavily limited. And if you're going to go down a touch-free path, one method is using the user's gaze. And a good way to do this is including a fixed element such as a reticle or crosshair that's fixed on the screen and just kind of tracks where the user's head moves. And that's a way of using kind of a digital pointer for them to select the object. And then you can use things like motion gesture to take an action on what they're pointing at.
And you can experience this for yourselves very easily, like in Google Cardboard where they have their demo apps. So there's like a little red circle that kind of simulates as if it is tracking your eyes, but you can move that digital dot around as your digital pointer. So a lot of AR apps also use the same principle.
Yeah. And then lastly, it's feedback on those interactions. So there are multiple ways to provide the user with feedback to confirm a user's action or interaction. If the main interaction modality is touch, visual, audio, or haptic feedback patterns that are already established in mobile can be those feedback patterns that are already successful in mobile can be applied to augmented reality.
So when we were showing you the Iron Man simulation, when you're touching those interfaces, the same principles that you use to open a menu, like on mobile apps, close a menu, right? All of those principles can be used successfully in that scenario. But if you are using touchless interactions, then your visual feedback that you're providing to the user, plus audio feedback, plus haptic feedback would be utilized differently. So for example, if you're using the digital pointer that's simulating the gaze, so a user would place the digital pointer on an object that they're wanting to select, and then the best practice that we know of so far would be to show some sort of a progress bar-like cue, visual cue, to say, okay, I'm selecting this object, so I have a few seconds for the progress bar to complete or for the digital object to change visually to indicate that I have selected. Those few seconds allow me as the user to also back out or cancel my action by moving the digital pointer away from that object. But this visual morphing or visual changing or the progress bar-like visual cue tells me that I am beginning to interact with this object, and this will confirm my action when I do it. Playing audio sounds with the visual information additionally reinforces whether my action as a user was successful or not. And again, haptic feedback such as buzzing can additionally reinforce that I have actually made a good selection or that my action is confirmed. So if any of you shop on Amazon using your mobile devices, so when you add an item to a cart, like it buzzes to confirm that you have completed that action successfully, in addition to showing a message that the action was complete. So you can use the same principle for AR as well.
So to sum up, you rely on tried and true mobile patterns and practices. Just consider that they're going to be in the AR space, which is going to use a live camera in the background, and consider how that's going to interact with those patterns that you may take from the mobile world. Make sure to test any new type of UI concepts with users that aren't well versed in the AR space. So
users who are not designers. Yeah. So explicitly here, I will say do usability tests as much as you can. And observe how people will interact with these new interfaces. So there's not an AR design manifesto yet. I think we have a few years to go until we can create that as a community. And because there's not a set best practices list, we need to test a lot of these ideas to make sure that they will be successful with the audience when we launch.
And then lastly, just share your findings and share what works, and through that community kind of interaction, we can nail down what best practices apply in the very different situations that AR can present to us. And if you want to try it, these are some of the applications that we've explored and shown.
These will be on iOS, on the Apple Store. I'm not sure if that's on Google Play. Just so in case you can't find those, just keep that in mind.
Yeah. And thank you. That's it.